Jake Morrison had never seen anything like the Nexus Prime space station. The massive structure floated in the dark between stars like a giant metal flower. Its 12 arms stretched out in different directions, each one built to welcome a different alien species. Jake pressed his face against the small window of the human transport ship and watched the station grow larger as they approached. "First time seeing the neutral zone?" asked Lisa Harper, sitting across from him. She was young for a military officer, maybe 30, with short brown hair and sharp green eyes. She had been assigned as his aide for this mission. "First time seeing anything this big," Jake said. He was 42 years old and had spent most of his life on Earth working as a diplomat. He had dealt with trade disputes and border problems between human colonies, but nothing had prepared him for this. The transport ship docked with a soft bump. Jake gathered his papers and followed Lisa through the airlock. The corridor beyond was huge, with a ceiling so high he could barely see the top. The walls were covered in strange symbols from different alien languages. "Welcome to Nexus Prime," said a voice in perfect English. Jake looked around but saw no one. Then he realized the voice came from speakers hidden in the walls. "Please, follow the blue lights to the human quarters." They walked through corridors filled with beings Jake had only seen in pictures. A group of tall, gray creatures with 4 arms walked past them, their footsteps making no sound. Behind them floated something that looked like a cloud of glowing gas moving slowly down the hall. "Those are Xanthari warriors," Lisa whispered, pointing to the tall gray aliens. "The floating thing is from the Whisper Collective. They don't have bodies like us." Jake nodded, trying not to stare. He had studied files about all 12 species that would be at these peace talks, but seeing them in person was different. Everything seemed bigger, stranger, and more dangerous than he had imagined. The human quarters were small compared to the rest of the station. 3 rooms connected by a narrow hallway. Jake's room had a simple bed, a desk, and another window, looking out at the stars. He put his suitcase on the bed and sat down, feeling the weight of what he was about to do. These peace talks were the most important meeting in the history of the galaxy. For 300 years, 12 different species had been fighting what everyone called the Silent War. It was not one big battle, but thousands of small fights, trade wars, and border disputes that never seemed to end. Jake had been chosen to represent Earth because he was good at solving problems between different groups. But the problems on Earth were simple compared to this. How do you make peace between species that had been enemies for centuries? A soft knock on his door interrupted his thoughts. "Come in," he called. Dr. Patricia Wells entered the room. She was older than Jake, maybe 50, with gray hair pulled back in a tight ponytail. She was the best expert on alien biology that Earth had, and she looked worried. "Jake, we need to talk," she said, closing the door behind her. "I have been reading the latest reports from the colonies. The situation is getting worse." She handed him a data pad filled with numbers and reports. Jake read through them quickly. Ships destroyed near the Kepler sector. Trade routes closed because of fighting between the Hydrons and the Xanthari. Human colonies running out of supplies because alien traders were too afraid to travel. "How many people have died in the last month?" Jake asked. 40,000, Patricia said quietly. "And that is just what we know about. Some of the fighting is happening in places where no one can send news back to us." Jake set down the data pad and rubbed his eyes. Every day these talks were delayed. More people died. Not just humans, but aliens too. The Xanthari had lost an entire mining colony last week. The crystal people called the Vexhi had seen 3 of their cities destroyed in attacks. "There is something else," Patricia continued. "Captain Henderson wants to meet with you before the talks begin tomorrow." Roy Henderson was the military advisor for their team. He was a career soldier, tall and serious, with short black hair and scars on his hands from old battles. Jake found him in the station's observation deck looking out at the stars. "Ambassador," Roy said without turning around, "we have a problem." "What kind of problem?" Roy handed him a small device that looked like a communicator. "This came through encrypted channels an hour ago. It is from Earth Command." Jake activated the device. A voice began speaking, giving him new orders. Earth wanted him to make a deal with the Xanthari for protection of human trade routes. They were willing to give up territory in 3-star systems if it meant safe passage for human ships. "They want me to pick sides," Jake said after the message ended. "That is what everyone does at these talks," Roy replied. "Each species makes deals with whoever gives them the best offer. The problem is that someone always gets left out, and then the fighting starts again." Jake looked out at the space station's central hub, where tomorrow he would sit with representatives from 12 different worlds. Each one would want something different. Each one would threaten war if they did not get what they wanted. "What, if there was another way?" Jake asked. Roy turned to look at him. "What do you mean? What if the problem is not that we cannot agree, but that we are not asking the right questions?" Before Roy could answer, the lights in the corridor dimmed, and a voice announced that all delegates should prepare for the opening ceremony. Jake straightened his tie and checked his papers one more time. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. He walked back to his quarters, passing more alien creatures in the hallway. A group of insect-like beings clicked and buzzed at each other in their own language. A creature that looked like it was made of living water flowed past in a special environmental suit. In his room, Jake sat at his desk and opened the files about the upcoming negotiations. Page after page of territorial disputes, trade disagreements, and old grudges between species. The same arguments that had been going on for 3 centuries. But as he read, Jake began to notice something strange. The timing of the conflicts seemed too perfect. Every time 2 species were close to making peace, something would happen to start the fighting again. Every time a trade agreement was almost signed, there would be an attack or an incident that made everyone angry. Jake closed the files and looked out his window at the stars. Somewhere out there, people were dying because 12 species could not agree on how to share the galaxy. Tomorrow, he would try to change that. He did not know yet that he was about to discover something that would change everything. He did not know that the war everyone was trying to end was not what it seemed to be. And he definitely did not know that the simple act of walking away from a meeting would shake the entire galaxy. But tonight, Jake Morrison was just a human diplomat, far from home, trying to help bring peace to the stars. The first day of peace talks was a disaster. Jake Morrison sat in the huge meeting room watching 12 different species argue about the same things they had been fighting over for 300 years. The room was so big that his voice echoed when he spoke, and the ceiling was covered with lights that changed colors depending on which alien was talking. The Xanthari delegate, a massive gray creature named War Speaker Thakmor, slammed his 4 fists on the table. His voice was so deep that Jake could feel it in his chest when the translator turned his words into English. "The mining rights to the Vega system belong to the Xanthari people," Thakmor growled. "We have held those worlds for 200 years. The Hydrons have no claim to our territory." Across the room, the Hydron representative flowed smoothly in her water-filled suit. She looked like a cross between a jellyfish and a woman, with long tentacles that moved as she spoke. "The Vega system contains rare minerals that are poison to water-based life forms," she said in a voice like rushing water. "Xanthari mining. Operations have killed millions of our people through contaminated space dust." Jake wrote notes on his tablet, but he was really watching the timing. This was the 3rd day of talks, and the same argument happened every day at exactly 2 o'clock. Station time. The Xanthari would demand mining rights. The Hydrons would talk about contamination. Then the insect-like Krilltar would accuse both of them of violating neutral space. Lisa Harper sat next to him, also taking notes. During a break, she leaned over and whispered, "This is exactly what happened at the last peace summit 5 years ago." "Same arguments?" Jake asked. "Same words," Lisa said. "I read the transcripts. War Speaker Thakmor said almost exactly the same thing about mining rights. The Hydron delegate used the same phrases about contamination." Jake looked around the room at the other delegates. The crystal creatures called Vexhi were making musical sounds that the translator turned into complaints about energy disruptions. The floating gas clouds of the Whisper Collective were creating electromagnetic patterns that meant they were angry about territorial boundaries. Dr. Patricia Wells approached their table during the break. Jake, we need to make a decision soon, she said quietly. Earth Command is asking for updates. They want to know which side we are supporting. What do you think? Jake asked. Patricia looked around the room at the arguing aliens. I think we are watching a performance, she said. Everyone knows their lines too well. Captain Roy Henderson joined them carrying a cup of coffee from the human food station. The Xanthari offered us exclusive trading rights if we support their mining claims, he said. The Hydrons are promising to share their water purification technology. What about the others? Jake asked. Everyone has something to offer, Roy said. The Kriltar want to give us access to their agricultural worlds. The Vexhai are offering crystal technology. Even the gas clouds are promising energy-sharing agreements. Jake studied his notes from the 3 days of talks. Every species had made offers to the humans. Every species had threatened war if they did not get what they wanted. And every species seemed to be reading from a script that never changed. That evening, Jake walked through the observation decks of Nexus Prime with Lisa. The station had areas where different species could look out, at space in their own way. The human section had simple windows. The Vexhai area had crystal panels that split light into rainbow colors. The Whisper Collective section was just an empty room where the gas beings could float and think. I have been thinking about what Dr. Wells said, Lisa told him as they looked out at the stars. About this being a performance. What do you mean? Look at the timing of everything, Lisa said. She pulled out her tablet and showed him a schedule. The Xanthari always make their territorial demands right after the Vexhai finish speaking about energy problems. The Whisper Collective only complains about space boundaries when the Nova Consortium is not in the room. Jake studied the schedule. She was right. The arguments followed a pattern that was too perfect to be natural. You think they planned this? I think someone planned this, Lisa said, but maybe not all of them know about it. They walked to another observation area where they could see some of the alien quarters. Through the transparent walls, Jake could see Xanthari warriors talking quietly with each other. In another section, Hydran delegates were floating in their water tanks, their tentacles moving in complex patterns. They look worried, Jake said. They should be, Lisa replied. If these talks fail, the fighting will get worse, more people will die. Jake was about to respond when his personal communicator beeped softly. He looked at the screen and saw that he had received a message. The sender was listed as unknown, but the message was marked as high priority and encrypted. Should I open it? He asked Lisa. Probably not, she said. It could be a trick. But Jake was curious. He had been a diplomat long enough to know that sometimes the most important information came from unexpected sources. He activated the encryption key and opened the message. What he saw made his blood run cold. The message contained financial records, lists of transactions between companies that Jake had never heard of. But the names of the company owners were familiar. Very familiar. War Speaker Thackmore was listed as a major shareholder in something called Galactic Defense Solutions. The Hydran delegate owned stock in Terraforming Unlimited. The Vexhai representative had investments in Crystal Mining Incorporated. Lisa, Jake said quietly. Look at this. She read over his shoulder, her eyes getting wider as she scrolled through the financial data. These are the same people who are negotiating peace, she said, and they all own companies that make money from war, Jake replied. The message continued with more information. Shipping records showing weapons being sold to both sides of conflicts. Communication logs between species that were supposed to be enemies. Meeting schedules that showed the same delegates who argued during the day were having private dinners together at night. This is impossible, Lisa said. They have been enemies for 3 centuries. Jake kept reading. The records went back decades, showing a pattern of carefully planned conflicts. Every time peace seemed possible, something would happen to restart the fighting. Every time a trade agreement was close to being signed, there would be an attack or an incident that made everyone angry. It is not impossible, Jake said slowly. It is business. He looked out at the stars, thinking about all the people who had died in the silent war. Human colonists killed in raids, Xanthari miners destroyed in explosions, Hydron research stations attacked by unknown ships. Thousands of deaths every year for 300 years. All of it planned. All of it profitable. Who sent this message? Lisa asked. Jake checked the sender information again, but it was still listed as unknown. Someone had taken a big risk to get this information to him. Someone who wanted the truth to come out. I do not know, he said. But I think we are about to find out why humanity was really invited to these peace talks. What do you mean? Jake closed the communicator and looked back at the alien quarters visible through the station walls. Tomorrow, there would be more arguments, more threats, and more offers of alliance. But now he knew it was all fake. I think we are not here to make peace, he said. I think we are here to take the blame when these talks fail. Lisa was quiet for a long moment. Then she asked, "What are we going to do?" Jake did not answer right away. He was thinking about the financial records, about the pattern of conflicts, and about the thousands of people who had died for someone else's profit. He was thinking about Earth Command's orders to pick a side, and about how every previous peace summit had ended the same way. I do not know yet, he said finally, but I am not going to let them use us. As they walked back to their quarters, Jake made a decision. Tomorrow he would not follow the script. Tomorrow he would ask different questions and see what happened. When the performance was interrupted, he did not know yet that his decision would change the entire galaxy. Jake Morrison woke up on the 4th day of peace talks to the sound of alarms. Red lights flashed in his room and a voice spoke from the walls in 12 different languages. The human translation came last. Emergency session called. All delegates report to main conference room immediately. Lisa Harper was already dressed and waiting in the hallway when Jake opened his door. She looked worried. There has been an attack, she said as they hurried toward the conference room. A Xanthari battlecruiser fired on a Hydron research ship near the Tau Ceti system. Jake felt his stomach drop. How many casualties? 17 Hydrons injured. The research ship is damaged but not destroyed, Lisa replied. But everyone is calling it an act of war. They entered the huge conference room to find chaos. War Speaker Thakmor was standing at his delegation's table, his 4 fists raised in the air, shouting in his deep voice. The Hydron delegate was flowing angrily in her water suit, her tentacles moving so fast they looked like they were dancing. Other aliens were making angry sounds in their own languages. The Hydron vessel was in Xanthari space without permission, Thakmor's translator announced. Our ship acted in self-defense according to Galactic law. The research vessel was conducting peaceful scientific studies in neutral territory, the Hydron delegate responded, her voice like an angry ocean. This unprovoked attack violates every peace treaty signed in the last century. Jake sat down at the human table and listened to the familiar pattern of accusations, but something felt wrong. He pulled out his tablet and began checking the details of the attack. The Hydron research ship had been studying coral growth on asteroids near Tau Ceti. The Xanthari cruiser had fired warning shots that accidentally hit the ship's communications array. The damage was serious, but not deadly. The timing was perfect to disrupt the peace talks just when they were reaching important decisions about territorial boundaries. Dr. Patricia Wells sat down next to him, carrying a stack of reports. I have been analyzing the attack location, she whispered. The research ship was exactly where it should not have been if it wanted to avoid Xanthari patrols. What do you mean? Jake asked quietly. Hydrons are expert navigators, Patricia explained. They know space currents better than any other species. There is no way they accidentally wandered into disputed territory. Captain Roy Henderson joined them at the table, his face grim. Earth Command is demanding an immediate response, he said in a low voice. They want us to choose sides now. What are our options? Jake asked. Support the Xanthari claim of self-defense, and they will give us exclusive mining rights in 4-star systems, Roy said. Support the Hydrons, and they will share their water purification technology with all human colonies. Jake looked around the conference room. The arguments were getting louder. Several delegations were threatening to leave the talks. The krill tar insects were clicking angrily at the Vex-High crystals. The Whisper Collective was creating electromagnetic storms that made the lights flicker. Ambassador Morrison, called the conference moderator, a computer voice that managed the formal procedures. The human delegation has not issued a statement about the Tau Ceti incident. Every alien in the room turned to look at the small human table. This was the moment Jake had been dreading. Every previous peace summit had reached this same point. A crisis would happen, sides would be chosen, and the fighting would continue. But Jake had spent the night studying the financial records from the mysterious message. He had discovered something that changed everything. The attack at Tau Ceti was not random. The damaged research ship was carrying survey equipment, not the valuable coral computing technology that made Hydron civilization possible. The Xanthari cruiser had fired warning shots that hit exactly the right systems to cause damage without casualties. Even the timing was perfect to cause maximum disruption with minimum real harm. Jake stood up slowly. Every eye, sensor, and alien consciousness in the room focused on him. The weight of representing all humanity pressed down on his shoulders, but he also felt something else. Anger. The Terran Federation has completed its analysis, Jake began, his voice carrying clearly through the room's sound system. Not just of this incident, but of the entire pattern of conflicts over the past 3 centuries. A strange quiet fell over the room. This was not how these moments usually went. Jake activated his tablet, and holographic displays around the chamber lit up with the financial records he had received. Bank transactions, shipping logs, and communication records filled the air above every delegation table. The Tau Ceti incident, Jake continued, his voice growing stronger, was no more real than the Kepler sector mining dispute, the Vegan trade route attacks, or the biological warfare accusations in the Centauri colonies. The room exploded in angry voices. War Speaker Thakmor roared that humans were making false accusations. The Hydron delegate created waves in her water suit that splashed against the transparent walls. The Whisper Collective generated an electromagnetic storm that made everyone's translators crackle with static. But Jake was not finished. Every major conflict of the past 3 centuries has been artificially created and carefully managed, he said, pointing to the holographic evidence around them. The silent war is not a war at all. It is a business. The displays showed undeniable proof. Xanthari Defense Corporation buying weapons from Hydron biotechnology companies. Vex high crystal manufacturers selling to both sides of territorial disputes. Kriltar agricultural firms creating artificial food shortages during emergencies to raise prices. You have been selling weapons to your own enemies, Jake said, creating conflicts so you can profit from solving them. Your own people have died to make you rich. Some delegates shouted louder, but Jake noticed that others had gone very quiet. Several aliens were studying the financial records with growing recognition. Not everyone in the room was part of the conspiracy. Dr. Wells grabbed his arm. Jake, you need to stop, she whispered urgently. We are going to be blamed for everything that happens next. Captain Henderson was already reaching for his emergency communicator, probably preparing to call their escort ships for immediate evacuation. Jake looked around the enormous room one more time. At War Speaker Thakmor's barely controlled rage. At the Hydron delegate's careful stillness. At the nervous energy patterns of the Whisper Collective representative. At 12 species, all trapped in roles they had been playing for centuries. Some of them knew they were lying. Others had been lied to by their own governments. But all of them were victims of the same system that turned galactic politics into a profitable game. The saddest part, Jake said into the chaos, is not that you have been lying to us. It is that you have been lying to yourselves. He gathered his papers and closed his tablet with a soft click that somehow seemed to echo through the vast space. The Terran Federation withdraws from these negotiations, Jake announced. Not because we are choosing sides in your manufactured conflicts, but because we refuse to participate in this deception any longer. The chamber fell into shocked silence. Jake Morrison, representing a species that had only reached the stars 300 years ago, began walking toward the exit. Behind him, Dr. Wells and Captain Henderson hurried to follow, along with the rest of the human delegation. Their footsteps echoed in the huge room as centuries of carefully maintained political theater began to crumble around them. Behind them, 12 species sat in stunned silence, finally forced to confront the truth about their endless war. Jake Morrison's footsteps echoed through the giant conference room as he walked toward the exit. Behind him, the silence was so complete he could hear his own heartbeat. 12 alien species sat frozen at their tables, staring at the holographic evidence that filled the air around them. Then the chaos began. War Speaker Thakmor leaped to his feet, his massive gray body shaking with rage. "Lies!" he roared, his voice so loud that the translation system squealed with feedback. "Human lies and accusations. You have no proof of these wild claims." But even as he shouted, Jake could see other Zenthari delegates at Thakmor's table, looking at the financial records with shocked expressions. They were reading the names of Zenthari companies, seeing transaction records they had never known existed. The Hydran delegate began flowing rapidly in her water suit, her tentacles moving in patterns that Jake's tablet translated as extreme agitation. "The humans are trying to destroy the peace process," she announced. "They want to blame all species for their own failures as mediators." Dr. Patricia Wells caught up with Jake near the exit door. "Are you sure about this?" she whispered urgently. "Once we leave, there is no going back." Jake paused and looked over his shoulder at the scene behind them. The Vex-High crystal beings were creating musical sounds of distress that made the air itself seem to vibrate. The insect-like Krilltar were clicking and buzzing at each other in rapid conversations. The floating gas clouds of the Whisper Collective were generating electromagnetic patterns that made the lights flicker wildly. But Jake also noticed something else. Not all of the aliens were angry or defensive. Some were studying the evidence, with what looked like genuine surprise and horror. A young Zenthari at Thakmor's table was reading through shipping records that showed weapons being sold to Hydron military forces. A Krilltar delegate was staring at agricultural reports that proved her own species had been creating artificial food shortages. Several Vex-High were harmonizing in what Jake's translator identified as sounds of deep sadness. "They are not all part of it," Jake said quietly to Patricia. "Some of them are victims too." Captain Roy Henderson reached them at the door, his hand on his communication device. "Jake, I am getting emergency signals from Earth Command," he said. "They want to know what we are doing. They are talking about sending military ships." "Tell them to wait," Jake said. "Wait for what?" Roy asked. Jake looked back at the conference room one more time. War Speaker Thakmor was still shouting, but fewer aliens were listening to him. Many were reading through the financial evidence, having quiet conversations with their own delegation members or just sitting in shocked silence. "Tell them to wait and see what happens when people learn the truth," Jake said. Lisa Harper joined them at the exit, carrying her tablet full of notes from the past 4 days. "The Terralite Silicon Collective just sent a private message," she said. "They want to know if the evidence includes information about their conflicts with the Nova Consortium." "What did you tell them?" Jake asked. "That they should look at the energy trading records from the past 50 years, Lisa replied. "Turns out the Nova Consortium has been buying silicon technology from the Terralites while publicly claiming that silicon-based life forms disrupt their energy patterns." Jake felt a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. The truth was coming out, but it was also destroying the beliefs that entire civilizations had built their identities around. The Zenthari saw themselves as proud warriors defending their territory. The Hydrans believed they were peaceful scientists protecting their research. The Krilltar thought they were farmers trying to feed a hungry galaxy. All of them had been manipulated by the same shadow corporations that profited from endless conflict. "Ambassador Morrison," called a voice from behind them. Jake turned to see one of the Vex-High delegates approaching. The crystal being moved slowly, its transparent body reflecting the emergency lights in rainbow patterns. When it spoke, its voice sounded like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "My name is Harmonic Resonance Zephi," the alien said through its translator. "I have been studying the financial records you presented. I must ask you a question." "What question?" Jake replied. "If what you have shown us is true, then my people have been killing and dying for nothing for 3 centuries, Zephi said. "Our crystal cities have been destroyed in raids that we believed were acts of war by our enemies. But these records, suggests that the attacks were arranged by Vex-High companies working with alien partners. The crystal being's voice carried such deep sadness that Jake felt his heart break a little. "I am sorry," he said simply. "Do not apologize for revealing truth," HFY replied. "But I must know, what happens now? If we stop the fighting, if we expose these shadow corporations, what becomes of our civilizations, our economies, our people who work in defense industries?" It was a good question, and Jake realized he did not have a complete answer. The galactic economy had been built around conflict for 3 centuries. Millions of beings across dozens of worlds worked in industries that existed only because of the silent war. If the fighting stopped suddenly, entire societies might collapse. "I do not know," Jake admitted. "But I know that continuing the lies will not help anyone except the people who are getting rich from your suffering." HFY's crystal body pulsed with soft light. "Perhaps that is what courage means," the alien said, "choosing an uncertain truth over a comfortable lie." Behind them, the sounds from the conference room were changing. The angry shouting was being replaced by quieter conversations. Jake could hear different species talking to each other, directly without going through the formal diplomatic procedures. Dr. Wells was reading something on her tablet. "Jake, you need to see this," she said. "We are getting messages from across the galaxy. News of what happened here is spreading through official and unofficial channels." Jake looked at the messages flowing across her screen. Reports from human colonies, Synthari worlds, Hydron research stations, and a dozen other planets. The evidence he had presented was being shared, analyzed, and discussed by millions of beings. "What are they saying?" he asked. "Mixed reactions," Patricia replied. "Some are calling it human propaganda, but others are demanding answers from their own governments. There are protests starting on several worlds." Captain Henderson's communicator beeped with an urgent message. "Earth Command wants us back immediately," he said after reading it. "They are worried about retaliation from the alien species." Jake looked through the transparent walls of the station at the ships floating in space around Nexus Prime. Synthari battlecruisers, Hydron research vessels, Krilltar agricultural ships, and representatives from 8 other species. Any one of them could destroy the human transport ship if they decided that humanity had become an enemy. "What do you think?" he asked his team. "I think we just changed everything," Lisa said quietly. "The question is whether we changed it for better or worse." Jake watched through the conference room windows as aliens who had been enemies for centuries began talking to each other without the formal rules of diplomacy. Some conversations looked angry, but others seemed curious or even friendly. "There is only one way to find out," he said. He turned away from the conference room and began walking toward the docking bay where their transport ship waited. Behind him, his team followed, and behind them, the galaxy began the slow and difficult process of learning to tell itself the truth. As they reached their ship, Jake looked back one more time at Nexus Prime. The space station still looked like a giant flower, its 12 arms reaching out toward the stars. But now it felt different. Instead of a place where enemies came to argue, it might become a place where friends came to solve problems together. Or it might become the place where galactic civilization finally tore itself apart. Either way, Jake Morrison had done the only thing he could do. He had refused to participate in a lie even when the truth was dangerous and uncertain. Now the galaxy would decide what to do with that truth. 3 months after Jake Morrison walked out of the peace talks at Nexus Prime, he sat in his office on Luna Station reading reports that he could barely believe. The window behind his desk showed Earth rising over the moon's horizon, blue and peaceful and seemingly unchanged. But across the galaxy, everything was different. Lisa Harper knocked on his door and entered carrying a stack of data tablets. She looked tired but happy. "The latest intelligence reports are here," she said, setting the tablets on his desk. "You are going to want to read these." Jake picked up the first tablet and began reading. The news was almost too good to be true. On Zenthar Prime, the gray homeworld of the warrior species, War Speaker Thakmor had been arrested by his own government. The financial records Jake had revealed showed that Thakmor had been personally profiting from weapons sales to enemy species for over 50 years. His arrest had led to investigations that uncovered an entire network of corrupt Zenthari officials. They found weapons stockpiles on 17 different Zenthari worlds, Lisa said, sitting in the chair across from his desk. All of them owned by companies that were supposed to be defending against alien attacks. Jake shook his head in amazement. What about the Hydrons? Even better news there, Lisa replied, handing him another tablet. The Hydron Collective dissolved 3 of their major military research divisions when their own people discovered that the territorial disputes were artificial. It turns out that most Hydrons never wanted to fight anyone. They just wanted to study ocean currents and grow coral. Jake read through the reports from the water worlds of the Hydron system. Public protests had forced the government to reveal decades of secret military spending. The Hydrons had been told that they needed weapons to defend against Zenthari expansion, but the record showed that Zenthari companies had been helping to design those same weapons. The beautiful part, Lisa continued, is that the Hydrons have started sharing their water purification technology with everyone for free. They say that if they were lied to about needing weapons, they want to make up for it by helping other species solve real problems. Dr. Patricia Wells appeared in the doorway, grinning widely. Jake, you need to come see the latest reports from the agricultural worlds, she said. Jake followed her to the station's main communications center, where screens showed news feeds from across the galaxy. On one screen, Krilltar insect farmers were working alongside human colonists to develop new crops. On another, Vex high crystal beings were teaching other species how to grow transparent food containers that never broke. The Krilltar were so angry when they found out about the artificial food shortages, Patricia explained. They have been trying to feed the galaxy for centuries, and shadow corporations were secretly destroying their shipments to create emergencies. Now they are working directly with colony worlds to make sure no one goes hungry. Jake watched the screens in wonder. Species that had been enemies for 300 years were working together to solve problems. The Terralite Silicon Collective was helping the Nova Consortium understand how silicon-based technology could actually improve energy distribution instead of disrupting it. The Whisper Collective was sharing weather control methods with agricultural worlds. Captain Roy Henderson joined them at the communications center. Jake, incoming message from the Galactic Communications Network, he said. It looks like a formal invitation. Invitation to what? Jake asked. Roy handed him a communication device. Something called the Honest Peace Summit. 11 species are asking for human mediation in actual negotiations this time. Jake activated the device and read the message. It was signed by representatives from every species except one. The Zenthari signature was missing, but there was a note explaining that the Zenthari were too busy arresting corrupt officials to send delegates immediately. They want us to help them figure out how to build economies that do not depend on conflict, Jake said after reading the full message. They are asking for advice on converting military industries to peaceful purposes. Are you going to accept? Lisa asked. Jake looked around the communication center at the screens showing cooperation between former enemies. 3 months ago, these same species had been threatening war over mining rights and territorial disputes. Now they were sharing technology and resources. I think we have to, he said. But this time we do it differently. Over the next few weeks, Jake worked with his team to design a new kind of peace summit. Instead of formal diplomatic procedures and careful protocols, they proposed simple meetings where species could talk directly about their real needs and problems. The first Honest Peace Summit was held on a small neutral station near the Galactic Center. Instead of a giant amphitheater with formal seating arrangements, they used a simple circular room where everyone could see everyone else. Jake was amazed at how different the conversations were. Without the pressure to perform for political audiences, the alien representatives talked about real issues. The Hydrons needed help cleaning up contaminated water systems. The Krilltar wanted to expand agricultural education. The Vexhi were interested in developing crystal technology for medical purposes instead of weapons. It is strange, said Harmonic Resonance Zephi, the Vexhi delegate who had spoken to Jake at Nexus Prime. When we stop pretending to be Enemies, we discover that we have many of the same problems. What kind of problems? Jake asked. Young people who want meaningful work instead of military service, HFY replied. Damaged environments that need restoration. Scientific questions that could be answered faster with cooperation between species. 6 months after the collapsed negotiations at Nexus Prime, Jake received a report that made him smile for the first time in years. The Galactic Conflict Monitoring Service, which had tracked wars and disputes for centuries, announced that major interspecies violence had dropped by 90%. How is that possible? He asked Lisa as they read the report. Together. It turns out that most of the conflicts were being started by the same shadow corporations, she replied. When those companies were exposed and shut down, the fighting just stopped. The species involved realized they had never really wanted to fight each other in the first place. Jake looked out his office window at Earth. Somewhere down there, children were growing up in a galaxy where 12 different species were learning to work together instead of fighting. Human colonies were receiving help from alien farmers, doctors, and engineers. And it had all started because one human diplomat had refused to participate in a lie. Dr. Wells knocked on his door. Jake, we just got a message from the Zenthari government, she said. They have finished their internal investigations and want to join the Honest Peace Summit. What did they find? Jake asked. That war speaker Thakmor was not the only one involved in the conspiracy, Patricia replied. But they also found thousands of Zenthari who had been lied to about the need for constant warfare. Most of their military personnel are asking to be retrained for peaceful purposes. That evening, Jake sat in his office reading reports from across the galaxy. Former weapons factories were being converted to produce medical equipment and farming tools. Military academies were becoming schools for engineering and environmental restoration. The galaxy still had problems, but now 12 species were working together to solve them. His communicator beeped with a personal message. It was from Harmonic Resonance HFY. Ambassador Morrison, the message read, My people have a saying. Truth is like crystal light. It can be bent and colored by those who hold it, but it always finds a way to shine clearly. Thank you for letting the truth shine. Jake smiled and looked out at the stars. The galaxy was still vast and complicated and full of challenges, but now it was also full of hope. Sometimes the most powerful thing you could do was simply refuse to accept a lie, even when everyone around you believed it was necessary. Sometimes walking away was the first step toward real peace.